Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Dexter, Market Advisor for Africa, Europe, Middle East, Central and South Asia at Singapore Business Federation. I will be your host for this fifth webinar for our South Asia edition from the Festival series. Festival is organized for the Global Connect SBF program, a strategic partnership between SBF and Enterprise Singapore, aimed at helping Singapore companies learn about business landscape and opportunities, land with business deal and or investment projects, and localize in those markets for sustainable business presence. Today's webinar is also supported by Federation of India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, FYII, Invest India, and Deloitte. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Your mics are muted by default, so that fellow participants will have a more conducive webinar environment. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel before you forget them. We have time for questions and answers in the later part of the webinar. Today's program starts off with an opening address by Mr. Rajesh Singh, partner at Deloitte and co-chair of Industry 4.0 at FYII. He will follow up with a presentation to share perspective on outlook and development of the manufacturing sector in India. After that, we will have a roundtable discussion on actionable plans on how Singapore companies can set foot in India's manufacturing sector through collaboration and investments. Together with Mr. Singh, Mr. Brianna Ho, Regional Director of South Asia at Enterprise Singapore, and Ms. Sunana Khanna, Senior Manager at the ASEAN Desk at Invest India, will also add much more colors to this panel. To start today's program, let me quickly walk you through SBF Globalization Initiative, Global Connect SBF. Global Connect SBF is formulated to assist Singaporean companies that are looking to internationalize and deepen their presence in overseas markets. Global Connect SBF helps Singapore companies to first learn about the country and the business opportunities it presents through sharing of useful resources like curated market information presentations, advisories on free trade agreement, and structured training through workshops, webinar, and more. We also conduct overseas visits for Singapore companies to experience and understand local business and culture, which in turn will help them better understand the market they wish to expand to. Global Connect SBF also aims to land business deals and investment projects through B2B matching, facilitating market and business development through identifying the right market for businesses and assessing the business capabilities. We currently have 3 Singapore enterprise centers overseas, set up in Jakarta, Ho Chi Minh City, and Bangkok. These SECs provide on-the-ground facilitation and in-market assistance. Lastly, we assist Singapore companies to localize in those markets for a sustainable business presence, to help to grow and integrate with the local networks and strengthen their presence. All right, now, you must be quite tired of hearing from me. Before I hand over, let's have a little warm-up on it by exercising your fingers a bit. Can you all let me know by a show of clicks on the poll question? Now, I'd like to invite Mr. Rajesh Singh, partner at Deloitte and co-chair of Industry 4.0 at FYII, to give the opening address. Mr. Singh, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dexter, and good afternoon to all the guests. Just wanted to do a quick voice check. Dexter, is my voice clear?
Yeah, all good, Mr. Singh.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for having me here. So as you said, I'll utilize the next 30 minutes to just give a little overview about what is happening in India from a manufacturing perspective over the last, say, 6-8 years specifically. But as I do so, let me also give you a little background in terms of how things have shaped up in the country. And if I can request someone to please move to the next page. Yes, maybe next page as well. And let me give a little overview of the next or the last a few decades in India. So someone, if you can help me go to the next page as well. So in India, if you look at predominantly, a lot of reforms were brought about in the last, say, last about 8 years or so. In 2014, we saw a lot of reforms come in. But let's go into the history as to why these reforms were required and what is it that India is trying to do over the last, say a couple of decades. I would say not just the last 8-10 years, but also since 1990, 1991, since we decided to open up our economy. Predominantly, India has been an agricultural economy, I would say, post its independence. And there was a time about 20 years back or 25 years back when 25% of our GDP used to come from agriculture. So it was predominantly agriculture, I would say, in that sense. But the share of agriculture in India has been reducing over the past few decades now. And the share of manufacturing particularly has been increasing. The share of services, of course, increased significantly. But the country realizes that unless and until we have a very strong manufacturing in the country, we will not be able to create enough employment for the entire the people that we have in the country. So coming back to set the context out here. So say about say about in 2014, when our new minister or new prime minister was there and the new government was formed, there was a lot of thinking about this, and we heard our prime minister talk about the 3Ds. We heard our prime minister talk about say the 1D, which was all to do with the demographic dividend. Given the population of the country, given a large number of working people that we have in the country, and so on and so forth. But how do we look at it as a dividend rather than thinking about it as a liability or it as a challenge in terms of having so many people to feed, but looking at it from a positive side, saying that okay, this is the population that we have, and how do we ensure that that population could be utilized in a manner that we could produce not only for India, but then India could also do manufacturing and production for the world. So that was one of the Ds that we heard our prime minister talk about. The second D was to do with the entire possibility from a country perspective on the democracy. Given that the country being a democratic country, there is a kind of a larger party behind, a larger political system behind ensuring continuum and so on and so forth. So how do we you leverage that particular D? And the third D was, of course, in terms of consumption and demand. Given the large population, how do we ensure that the demand of this population itself is going to be fulfilled through manufacturing, but not limiting only to the demand of the country, also expanding it and saying that, okay, how do we meet the demands of the larger world? So keeping those 3Ds in mind, we had our prime minister launch a set of initiatives, I would say not one, but a large number of initiatives that were set in 2014. And we will come to in a while to see as to how each of these initiatives made an impact and so on and so forth. So the first initiative was all to do with skilling. And given the large demographic dividend that I spoke about, how do we ensure that we reskill the people and make them ready for deployment from a manufacturing perspective was the focus. The second focus was all to do with how do we attract investments and how do we promote investments. So this was not just to do with attracting investors, simplifying the processes, but also looking at making an ecosystem which is enabling investment. So whether this was to do with labor reforms, whether it was to do with tax reforms, whether it was to do with the land reforms and so on and so forth. But the idea was, how do you make ease of doing business in the country better? So that was the second focus. And the third focus was all to do about job creation, which was how to ensure that people make in India, not just for India, but as for the globe as well. But at the same time, try and look at other enablers, whether it is from a startup ecosystem perspective, whether it is from a digitization perspective, and so on. So a lot of initiatives were started around these three correlated areas that you see in some manner. But moving a step behind, and someone prompted me, so let me come back. Moving a step behind, why manufacturing, and why in India manufacturing? And I'll take maybe a couple of seconds here or a couple of minutes here just to talk about it. So keeping in mind, overall, if I look at manufacturing, there are economies who have GDPs to the extent of say 25%, 30% of the GDP coming from manufacturing. And there could be economies where manufacturing could contribute just in about single digits, maybe 6%, 8%. In India, manufacturing contributes at about say 17, 18% of the GDP today. And of course, the aspiration was to take it to about 25, 26%, and that's where the country is on its journey. But the reason why we wanted to focus so heavily on manufacturing is because it's multiplier effect. Given that for every one job that we create in manufacturing, we are able to create 3 more jobs in the services. So the multiplier effect of manufacturing is what was important for us at that point in time. But at the same time, I must also say that India's share of the global manufacturing is pretty small. India's share of global manufacturing is probably in small single digits and so on and so forth. And the idea is, how do we grow our market share also in the global manufacturing footprint? And as we do that, I think it's not just about these 3 things that you see out here, which is in terms of skilling, which is in terms of investments, or whether it is in terms of job, but a lot more that needs to be done from a brand India per se itself. How to ensure that people feel that they want to come and manufacturing in India, so that creating of the brand of India itself is very important. But coming back to, the government started with a host of initiatives, I would say, around these 3 themes. Moving on to the next page. But as the government was trying to do this thing, the task was not easy. If I can get the next page as well. So the task was not easy. The reason is because there were challenges, there were difficulties that people were facing. And the first thing that the government decided to do was to simplify the processes. And as the government decided to simplify the processes, they also decided to digitize as many processes as possible. This were all to do with the process of, say, setting up a facility or a manufacturing facility in India itself. And when I say manufacturing, I don't mean just producing or putting up factories, but also say warehouses, logistics, and other infrastructure facilities that may have to be built in the country. But as organizations come into the country, how do we ensure that the process is easier, it's smoother, there is less of paperwork and so on? And a lot of steps have been taken actually over the last few years in terms of simplifying some of these. Some of these have been automated already. But the challenge is also that all of this is not something that the central government can do by itself. Now, India is a mix of a large number of states. So it's a federal of about 30 states along with the center. And while center may do some amount of facilitation, each of the states also need to kind of keep pace with it in terms of ensuring that a lot of things are simplified in the same manner. The reason is because some of the subjects may not be necessarily coming under only the central government. They could come in the joint list between the center and the state. For example, if anyone is supposed to put up a manufacturing plant in the country, say one of the things that is required is land. Now, how do you ensure that the land is aggregated and made available to the manufacturer? So a lot of work in terms of ensuring that land parcels are made available to the manufacturing players. And the success that we would have seen would be different in different states. In some states, probably the state governments have been more successful, I would say, in terms of ensuring that the land was made available to the manufacturing companies in an aggregated manner, whereas some states are still struggling with it. The other could be to do with say power. Once again, a state subject. So how do you ensure that power is available at a lower cost or at a competitive cost? Let me put it that way. But the focus was try and simplify these processes, try and simplify the clearances that are required, and maybe 50, 60 odd departments from which clearances are required. So can there be a single window for getting those clearances? So rather than the manufacturing companies or investors having to go through each of the departments by themselves, can there be a single window where they go, they apply, and that particular single window takes care of the clearances that are required from all the other departments internally? So a lot of those simplification of those processes, a lot of transparency in terms of the way of doing business, a lot of update in terms of where is the process right now, to what extent the progress has been made. So a lot of these things were simplified at the start, I would say, of the launch of this Make in India campaign. And the center worked along with different state governments to ensure that some of these things were done jointly. Moving on, while a lot of these things, moving on to the next page. So while a lot of these things were done by the center and the state government, there were some challenges still that the organizations faced. If I can get the next page, please. Yeah, while as I said that there were a lot of initiatives that were taken, there were also a lot of challenges that the organizations faced. So one of the biggest challenge has been land, and I would not say that this challenge is completely overcome, but different state governments have met with different kinds of successes. Now, a large amount of land in the country is, of course, under agriculture, and the land holdings in agriculture are also small. So that's one challenge that the government is trying to work upon, how to ensure that that land is you put to better use in terms of productivity improvement and so on and so forth. But as we industrialize, we also realize that we are going to urbanize at the same side, because the two things, which is industrialization and urbanization, are two sides of the same coin in some manner. So we are going to see growth in terms of the city limits or the limits of the developed areas, say, which are there. This is going to no doubt put a little pressure when it comes to agricultural land or in terms of the green zones which are there. But that's what the government is trying to focus, that how do you do it in a sustainable manner? How do you ensure that as growth happens, we don't put too much of pressure on the existing cities and overburden them with the requirement in terms of the various utilities and the facilities that are required for the citizens, but look at adjoining cities, look at new cities. And that's the reason why you will find a lot of new cities or new development hubs which have come up in the country. These are not necessarily the tier 1 or the bigger cities, the metropolitans that we are typically known for from the country, but a lot of smaller cities which have become bigger hubs now from a manufacturing perspective, but also from a perspective of infrastructure and connectivity perspective, because as we want to attract manufacturing, there is a need for also ensuring connectivity. We do realize as a country that while we have a very large coastal belt or a belt around the ocean, but it's only, say, the one half of the country which enjoys, say, the larger coastal area. A lot of land is actually landlocked, especially in the northern part of the country. But a lot of manufacturing is also possible in the northern part of the country at the same time, given a high population and proximity to the demand in that place. So how do we ensure that getting material in and getting material out from each of these locations is also made equally smooth? So those were some of the challenges, I would say, that the government is already working upon. The government has also worked upon and simplified the tax procedures. Currently, there is a lot of effort which has been put around the labor laws, but of course, the labor laws being a joint subject, while the central government may have done a lot of initiatives, the state governments are doing it turn by turn. But land reforms is another big thing where some amount of effort has gone through, but these are some of the challenges which I would say are still under some kind of a process or progress. Power availability has improved in the country significantly. From one point in time where there were a significant amount of power cuts in the country, getting cheap power or competitive power was a difficulty, to today having a large number of states in the country which are power surplus, which means that we are in a situation where a lot of states are able to produce more power than what the demand is, keeping in mind a large amount of investment which is likely to happen. So a lot of these challenges from a power perspective are also getting addressed, but still some distance to go. I would say that how do we ensure that we become more sustainable, more green, when it comes to power generation? How do we ensure that our transmission and distribution losses go down so that the cost of acquiring power or the cost of making power available to the manufacturers can be further reduced? So the country is working on some of those challenges, I would say. But the good news is that at least the government recognizes that these are some of the challenges which are the top challenges that one needs to work upon to ensure more amount of manufacturing can be attracted into the country. So moving on to the next page, so So those were some of the things, if I have to take a pause and say that, okay, what is it that the government is already doing? But the government has also achieved quite a bit of significant things over the last 7 years. Moving on to the next page, and the government has also undertaken a lot of reforms, I would say, in the last couple of years, especially in the COVID uncertainty, to drive more investments in manufacturing. So moving on to the next page, on all the parameters, whether it is ease of doing business, whether it is to do with say tax reforms, whether it is to do with foreign direct investments in the country, or it is to do with the financing and the bankruptcy code the country or the government came out with, or a lot of initiative, I would say a lot of initiative in terms of infrastructure building. So whether it is in terms of seaports, whether it is in terms of roads, using ways for transportation, a lot of effort out there. And also from a renewable energy perspective, given the focus on environment, the focus on how to reduce pollution, a lot of focus in terms of switching towards renewable sources as we grow. So a lot of progress, I would say, and the next few pages will outline a few pages in terms of, or would outline a few numbers in terms of achievements on each of these parameters. So moving on to the next page. So say, for example, if I look at FDI, the country has been in the top 3, top 4 in terms of attracting FDI in the last 7-8 years now. Even during the COVID times, the peak of COVID times, India was in the top 2, top 3 in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. Now, this is very important because as a key metric from a government perspective, it only indicates that the investors really believe in the growth story of India. They believe in the 3Ds, which is of demographic dividend, which is in democracy, and which is in demand, which exists in the country. So that's the reason why we see a lot of foreign direct investments coming in the country. And these investments have also come a lot in terms of capital creation, which is important, or asset creation, which is important. So putting up, say FDIs for from a perspective of infrastructure, or FDIs from a perspective of manufacturing. So we have seen, and it is not just 1 or 2 sectors, but we have seen FDI coming in a large number of sectors. A lot of changes have been done by the government as well. For example, the FDI rules have been liberalized significantly over the last few years. Some of the sectors which were kind of unthought of earlier, whether it is to do with mining or whether it is to do with defense. So some of these sectors also have been opened up from an FDI rules perspective. Similarly, Atmanirbhar Bharat is all about self-independency in some sense. How do you ensure that India is able to produce a lot of things for its own requirements in some manner? But this is not just for supporting Indian manufacturers to produce, but also ensuring that foreign investors come in wherever necessary to make the country self-dependent, so that India doesn't have to depend on any other country for imports. For example, India does do a lot of imports in manufacturing when it comes to capital goods, when it comes to electricals and electronics in certain areas, and so on and so forth. Semiconductors, when it comes to EVs, especially batteries. And that's where the focus is in terms of ensuring that how do we ensure that we produce whatever is required by us in the country itself, and not just for ourselves, as I said, but even for the world. So a lot of initiatives around that, a lot of focus on the small, medium and the micro segments, a large amount of people employed. In fact, if I would say the entire manufacturing, a large number of people in manufacturing are actually employed in the MSME segment today. And that's where the government's focus is in terms of how do we scale them up and how do we make them competitive from a global scale perspective. So that's another focus that the government is having. Moving on to the next page. So similarly, defense. Now, the country has announced already 2 defense corridors in 2 different states. And there is a lot of focus in terms of ensuring that we start to produce or get private investors rather to produce a lot of our defense requirements. So the sector, I would say, is opening up and huge opportunities out there. This is also one of the sectors where the government feels that eventually India could be an exporter as well. So today India may be an importer, but going forward, India could become an exporter. especially in certain segments when it comes to defense. Similarly, during the COVID times, the country did a lot of initiatives in terms of ensuring that whatever health requirements from a diagnostics perspective, medical equipments perspective, oxygen perspective, how do we ensure that these were all manufactured within the country and made available to the people? Moving on to the next page. So going ahead, if I look at it, the government has also announced a slew of further opportunities, and these were all triggered during the COVID times. While the first set of reforms, which was, say, Make in India 1.0, if I have to call, and now it is Make in India 2.0. In Make in India 1.0, the entire focus was more around simplifying processes, reworking on the land reforms, the labor laws, the tax reforms, the banking reforms, and so on and so forth. So we saw a lot of systemic and process changes along with digitization in the Make in India 1.0 campaign. But the Make in India 2.0 campaign, and also given the kind of consumer behavior and the consumer sentiments from a perspective of COVID and so on and so forth, the entire focus also has been on providing incentives. And this is one thing that I would request everyone to look forward to, because the central government, and now along with the central government, a lot of state governments are also providing incentives for people who want to come and invest in the country. So moving on to the next page, just to give a little overview of kind of investments that we are seeing. So clearly a focus on electronics and manufacturing, a large outlay out there in terms of how to support manufacturing, especially when it comes to electronics, and creating the entire ecosystem. So there is a huge outlay. Now, some of these numbers are just from the central government perspective, but when some of the manufacturers come in the domain of electricals or electronics, not just the central government, but even the state governments provide a incentive which is over and above the incentive that is provided by the central government here. So it makes a lot of sense for people to look at India from a manufacturing perspective, because it helps them reduce their entire return on investment. And also there is a large captive demand which is anyways available from a country perspective. So a lot of initiatives, I would say, around electronics and manufacturing. Moving on to the next page. So around PLI, now this is when it began with, the focus was to begin with on 10 sectors. But eventually the government has identified now 13 or 14 sectors where the government is trying to attract production-linked incentive scheme. In short, it means that if anyone is coming into India and focusing on some of the sectors which have been identified under the production-linked incentive scheme, then you get eligible to get that incentive over a span of 5 years, or as the different times may be defined for different sectors and so on and so forth. And this definitely helps in terms of making the business case of putting up a facility in India far more attractive. Already we are seeing that some of these PLIs which were done in the past have given good benefits. For example, the PLI which was linked to manufacturing of mobile phones. India is already the world's second largest mobile manufacturer now. The second largest manufacturing plant, say for example, a player like Samsung is based here in India, or I would say the largest outside South Korea is here in India. So we are seeing already a lot of investment come in some of these sectors. And along with some of these players, it's not just the manufacturing, but it's also the entire ecosystem which gets developed, which could aid in manufacturing of many other electronic components as well. Moving on to the next page. So some of the sectors where we are seeing the PLI getting announced, say for example, advanced chemistry for cells. Now there is a large outlay of 18,100 crore that we see out here. Now the players who were interested, say for example, in getting into ACC or advanced chemistry cells have already been approved. But some of them might look at joint venture players as well. Some of them are, of course, global players who are coming in wanting to set shop for manufacturing batteries in the country. But some of them could be also Indian players who might be looking at tie-ups with larger global players as they set up large manufacturing base in the country. But coming back to, as I said, about 13 sectors, so 10 sectors here, 3 more sectors got identified later on. And the outlay increased from 1,45,000 crores that you see here to 1,58,000 crore. Similarly, MITI, which is the Ministry for Electronics and Information Technology, has its own outlay from an electronics perspective. The Department of Heavy Industries has a very large outlay for auto and auto component players. The Department of Pharmaceuticals, for example, the outlay that they have for drug manufacturing and manufacturing of also medical equipments or diagnostic equipments in the country. The Department of Telecommunication, for example, to attract from a perspective of the telecom equipment. The Ministry of Textiles, given that textiles is also a large employment generator. So how do we ensure that we attract a large number of textile manufacturers from an India perspective? Moving on to the next page. So these were all PLIs which got announced over the recent times. Similarly, Ministry of Food Processing. Now, this is a very, very big focus for the country, given that India is also a very large agricultural country, but a lot of food and millets and pulses and grains and fruits that we produce need not be necessarily processed in the country. A lot of value addition could be done to some of these products. And by value addition, I don't mean just going down the value chain to make food products itself, but that could be multiple new applications as well. For example, how do we utilize, say, sugarcane, which is produced in the country, to produce ethanol, for example? And ethanol is also something that the country itself will consume, because we are moving away from, say, a policy where vehicles were run only on petroleum, whether it is gasoline, whether it is, say, diesel or petrol. Now we have a 10% blend with ethanol. But going ahead, the government wants to make it as a 20% blend, and moving in the direction, say, some of the countries like Brazil, which have moved to 60-40 and so on and so forth. So how do we utilize these food products that are being produced in the country in a more meaningful manner? And that gives a huge amount of opportunity for players who are looking at getting into this space. Similarly, the space of renewable energy, whether it is to do with solar, whether it is to do with wind, or whether it is to do with green hydrogen or any other biofuel, for example. A lot of agricultural waste in the country, and biofuel could be another great example of how we could not only put this waste to use, but also ensure that some of the farmers in the country who are used to burning stubble in the country don't do that going ahead, so that the pollution problem also can be tackled. So a lot of opportunities, I would say, whether it is solar, wind, and the country is blessed in terms of solar. So a lot of sun energy available for a large part of the year in a large part of the country. So the efficiencies are better for such manufacturing plants in the country. Similarly, a lot of focus even on consumer durables. So whether it is ACs, TVs, and so on and so forth. So an outlay for that particular demand as well. And lastly, even from a steel perspective, so outlay even from specialty steel. The government realizes that we do import a lot of steel from other countries currently. And how do we ensure that our dependency on some of these imports goes down and we become self-sufficient in terms of our requirement of special steels and so on. So a lot of these, moving on to the next page. So this is about the battery manufacturing, so I won't take much time. I already spoke about it, but I wanted to touch upon one more page. I think that's after this, which is to do with semiconductors. So next page, please. So the government is also focusing in a big manner on putting up large semiconductor facilities in the country. Today, of course, most of the semiconductor manufacturing globally is concentrated only with a couple of countries, as we all know. But the government is making significant attempt in terms of attracting investments. Why I said significant is because these are large capital intensive facilities. But the government has stuck its neck out by saying that 50% of that cost, the project cost, will be subsidized by the central government. And it doesn't stop there, because some of the states which are trying to attract the large semiconductor manufacturers into the country are saying that over and above this 50% incentive that the government is providing, they are willing to provide an additional 25-30% additional incentive, which means that if the cost of putting a large semiconductor facility ran into a few $1 billion, almost about say 75% of that is going to get incentivized either by the central or the state government, which makes it as a very, very lucrative decision for a large business players to set up manufacturing plants. As we speak here, already there are a couple of players who have shown interest in setting up manufacturing plants for semiconductors in the country. Now, why this is important is not just because those mega large mother plants which will come up in the country, but also along with them, the entire ecosystem that will be built, and ecosystem of the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers and the assemblers which will come up in the country. So a huge opportunity from this perspective. So those were some of the things. Moving on, I think this was the last page, but just doing a double check if this was indeed the last page. Yes, so that's a quick summary from my side in terms of how the country is looking at manufacturing. Just to quickly summarize, I would say that the Make in India campaign ran in 2 parts. The first part was, say, if I have to call it as now, Make in India 1.0. The entire focus, as you saw, was more around processes, digitization, all kinds of reforms, whether they were in terms of land reforms, tax reforms, labor reforms, banking reforms, and so on. And the second phase, which we can now call as, say, Make in India 2.0, where the focus is on a few select sectors, not all the sectors, but a few select sectors where we all believe that India has a competitive advantage. And some of these advantages could hence be leveraged better. So that is where the government wants to put in more money in terms of providing those incentives. So that is how overall we are seeing these 2 campaigns being run. Some amount of success we have already seen at the end of campaign 1, where we saw a significant amount of increase in FDI. I know people say that, okay, we have seen FDI coming in, but we have not yet seen the GDP go up, say, from a perspective of manufacturing. But I think it's a lead and a lag effect. So a lot of FDI gone in. Manufacturing plants, as we all know, take a little time for them to start commercial production and so on and so forth. But I think that given the amount of investment, that's as a lead indicator, if we see the amount of investment that has happened, not just by FDI, but even the private players in the country who have done the investment that the government themselves have done, the investment that has come in via various kinds of soft loans, whether it is from World Bank, ADB, and others. I think a huge amount of investment that we have seen over the last few years is what will lead India to become a 5 trillion and eventually a $10 trillion economy. So that is what we are looking forward to. With that, let me hand over back. I am sorry, I took a couple of minutes more than the time that you allotted, but thanks a lot for giving us this opportunity. Thanks, Dexter.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Thank you for doing the opening presentation, as well as sharing with us more on the manufacturing sector in India. So for now, time for question and answer. Together with Ms. Ho and Ms. Kaina, Mr. Singh will join as well as the panel. So for the attendees, please feel free to ask our panel anything about the post-COVID opportunity via the Q&A box below. So maybe I will take a lead and ask a question. Let me see. Okay, so first question first to the panelists. The manufacturing GDP hardly changed during the first 5 years after Made in India initiative was launched. What, in your opinion, are some of the difficulties in achieving these quantitative targets, and how can these difficulties be overcome? Maybe Sabrina or Sunaina, you might be keen to answer this question.
So I can maybe start, and Sabrina, you can add on things that I may miss. Basically, firstly, for everyone's benefit, in addition to Mr. Singh's entire presentation on Make in India, which was very holistic, I would just like to add that Make in India was basically the initiative of the government of India to encourage companies to develop, manufacture, assemble products in India, and to incentivize dedicated investments into manufacturing specifically. So the idea, of course, was to transform India into a global design and manufacturing export hub. But apart from just manufacturing, it also focused on creating a conducive environment for investments, for developing modern and efficient infrastructure, and opening up sectors to foreign investors. So although Make in India may not have, achieved its goals in terms of the growth rate of the manufacturing sector or the sector's overall contribution to the country's GDP, if we see year on year, the FDI inflows into India have actually increased. Mr. Singh told us about the FDI that we got last year, which was about 81 billion US dollars. But I'm happy to point out that this year in FY22, we actually reached $83.57 billion, despite various economic slowdowns that have resulted from the pandemic across the globe. In addition to, the FDI that we've received, India's ranking on several ease of doing business measures also improved. And one of the major pillars of Make in India was investment into infrastructure development. And we can actually firsthand see these improvements with the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan, where the government of India, plans to spend close to $1.5 trillion over 5 years to improve roads, highways, railways, and just overall connectivity. So perhaps one of the ways that you measure outcomes would be to look at holistic milestones achieved rather than just, quantitative targets that were possibly set out at the time that the initiative was launched. I think that's the way that I would look at it.
If I can just maybe add on a little bit to
Sabrina,
what Sunaina shared, I think to be, again, very fair to the government, I think if we talk about the industry transformation itself, and when we talk about manufacturing in India, even with the focus on 14 sectors now, I think these are all massive sectors in their own right. It takes time to transform these industries. And I think if we're looking at the time horizon of the first 5 years that Make in India was launched, the significant progress, or at least changes that we have seen, is really considered as almost like the first phase of reforms. I think the progress in terms of the ease of doing business, you can see in terms of the states really building up and beefing up their capacity in really understanding what investors need and actually engaging investors. I think that's where we have seen very significant changes within the states itself. I think where the time horizon you might want to look at is actually after this first 5 years, what has been the progress since? And I think like what Rajiv shared earlier, we are now seeing the results after the first 5 years. And in fact, I think what's very promising in terms of the trajectory of change is that you are seeing ministries actually being more proactive in engaging industry. You are seeing ministries actually taking steps and adjusting, I think, even some of their schemes. So I think this willingness to recognize that plans need to be augmented, need to be adjusted according to what industry is feeding back to them. I think that's a very positive change that we have seen, and I think that's a very welcoming change. I'm not saying there aren't existing challenges, there continues to be, but I think we are seeing that India is moving in the right direction, and it is actually moving, and I think the pace of change is now happening.
Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, Sunaina. Okay, so I think we talked about the changes and some of the challenges for this initiative through your answer just now. So maybe from our point of view, some of the questions that have been asked by the attendees or even like the attendees that can't make it. So are there any structural issues present in the framework of this initiative? If so, what are these issues and how do you think it can be resolved?
Sorry, Dexter, at least I couldn't get it. Can you repeat?
Okay, so are there any structural issues present in the framework of the Make in India initiative? And if so, what are these structural issues and how do you think it can be resolved for this initiative, the issues in this initiative?
Maybe if I can venture an answer, and probably Sunaina and Rajiv, you can kind of jump in and see, because I think you're closer to the policy side and you might be able to see might be able to share a bit more on what's happening. I think the challenge when we talk about a lot of the Make in India specific initiatives, it targets the manufacturers itself, right? So I'd say it's the tier 1 manufacturers. I think the policies and the agencies are now recognizing that it's not just that OEM it's not just the leading OEMs that they need to engage, but also think more holistically in terms of the development of the entirety of the ecosystem. So I think there are steps being taken to I say roll out new schemes and roll out new initiatives to build up the ecosystem such that the OEMs can actually sustainably execute their investment plans. I think that's one. But also I think where another large initiative of India is really the export agenda, which I think Rajiv mentioned a few times earlier. I think a large piece of the manufacturing agenda now is also towards expanding the export-led manufacturing piece of it. And I think one of the big gaps on that front is actually on the logistics sector in India that needs still infrastructure improvements. And I think that's probably one of EVR's structural limitations in terms of maybe being able to see some progress on that front. Yeah.
Just to add to what Sabrina said, and maybe I'll just point out three things I think that we would love the government to do a little more. One is around land reforms in the country. The land holding patterns, the title of the land, the use of the land, the purpose of the land itself for which the land can be used. I think some of these matters need to be resolved at a faster pace. When any manufacturing plant wants to come into the country, it's not just the manufacturing plant, but also the entire ecosystem which requires land. And typically the state government or the central governments today struggle in terms of creating these parcels of land and make it available to the investors in an easier manner. So that's one structural change that I would say is required. The second structural change is to do with labor laws. While the central government has tried to reduce or rationalize the number of laws that we had, say from 40 plus to about a single digit number of 6 or 8 laws now. But some of these cannot be done by the central government by themselves. These structural reforms need to be modified by the state government as well, because it's a federal state. So there are certain reforms that the center can do, but there are certain reforms which the states also have to do. So that's the second thing I would say from a structural perspective, Dexter, that the government needs to do. And the third thing is that from a perspective of investments, today we find a lot of investments which are coming sector specific. But how do you create an ecosystem park so that it becomes easier for players to do business? Say, for example, a pharmaceutical company coming in, right? Now, if there would have been an ecosystem in the country where, say, the effluent treatment is taken care of by a central agency, the utilities in terms of steam, the utilities in terms of compressed airs are being provided centrally by an agency, then it becomes a plug and play for a pharma company to just come with the pharma plant and start manufacturing in that particular ecosystem. So those are some of the couple of additional thoughts to what Sabrina said could be done going ahead to make ease of doing business still better in the country.
Thank you, Sabrina and Mr. Singh. I think we have a few questions from the Q&A. Mr. Singh, I think regarding the presentation as well, what you have shared, one of this, Mr. Suraj has actually asked, do you foresee a slowdown linked to the current global situation to impact the planned growth rate? I believe towards the manufacturing sector in India. If yes, which segment and what percentage of impact is possible, or what is the percentage of impact do you think will be possible for this sector in India?
So maybe I'm more an optimistic person, Suraj. So I would say that I agree that there is a global slowdown. We are seeing significant slowdown, whether it is across Europe and US. But in India, we so far at least have been able to ensure that our demand continues. Maybe that we are isolated to a certain extent, that we are still able to ensure that a large population, a large demand base that we have is still continuing to grow. Maybe hence those sectors, Suraj, where we are exporting heavily, let me put it that way, where probably we are fulfilling the demand of, say, coming from Europe or coming from US, those sectors where we are trying to fulfill that demand, those are the only sectors which I think will get impacted in the slowdown. But a lot of sectors, a lot of them are currently fulfilling the requirement within the country itself, which is the demand within the country itself. And that's the reason why I think that we will continue to see a strong story. Fortunately, India will continue to remain in the top 10 in terms of growth, even over the next 5 years, despite the slowdown. So we feel to be, at least I feel to be very, very optimistic about the growth story, given the fundamentals are very, very strong. So from a PLI perspective, if you look at those 13 sectors which the government has identified, most of those sectors were designed from a perspective of meeting the self-sufficiency of the country itself. And that's the reason why those 13 sectors would continue to remain strong from a investment perspective, Suraj.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Okay, so maybe just back to you again. There's one question regarding PLI. We did a presentation on. So this attendee actually asked, I understand that PLI is only available if companies start manufacturing by a specific date. Correct him if you're wrong, the time should be around May 2024. So any inputs or updates from the panel on this or to share with them, is this the correct information they have received regarding this?
So I can add in, maybe Sunaina or Sabrina, if you want to chip in. My view is that when the PLI schemes were announced, the understanding was right that the window was 5 years, and the window was from the time of, say, whenever the manufacturing plant was going to be set up and so on and so forth. But the government realized that this, because a lot of industry bodies actually went back to the government and tried to explain that, see, this 5 years is not a right time horizon. Because say I start to put up a manufacturing plant in, let me take live example. Say I put up a manufacturing plant or start to put up a manufacturing plant from today onwards. Say this is August 2022. But I start to produce, say, 1 year, 1.5 years down the line. And if you give me only 5 years as a window, starting from 2021 onwards, then the window that I have left within the PLI is very small for me to really get the full benefit of the incentive. So the government recognizes this, and that's the reason why the government has been flexible sector by sector. Of course, it is not going to be one size fitting all, because each sector has its own time which it takes for putting up the capital investment and start to manufacture and ramp up production and so on and so forth. But sector by sector, offline, I'll be happy to guide in case there is any help required as to what is the timeline that the government will consider from an incentive perspective.
Right. And, as Mr. Singh mentioned, that there were PLI schemes introduced in 13 sectors, 14 if you include drones as a separate sector. Although most of the schemes have now closed, owing to their success, there are actually a lot of ministries that are going to be launching their PLI 2.0s. In fact, the Ministry of Food Processing Industries, in fact, is, I think, launching a couple of PLIs at the end of the year. So I think everyone should just stand by and see what new PLIs come into play that they can apply for. And it's not just about the PLI schemes and the manufacturing in the PLI scheme industries, because there are so many other complementary industries that then open up, including the most important one, which is infrastructure, because all of these industries will need infrastructure investment as well. So I think those are just a couple of points that I'd like to add.
I think if I can maybe just add on a little bit perspective-wise, I think being a government agency as well, I think we should look at such schemes as it's intended as a catalyst. I think it'll be challenging to expect that these schemes to have the longevity of however long the sector develops. And I thought it was actually quite smart how the government had almost made it like a competitive process, right? To again catalyze the development of the industry. So I think those in the audience, maybe one way to look at the PLI schemes that are announced is these are the sectors which the government is going to make very intentional efforts to develop. And I think where the government is now willing to actually listen, if you are a serious investor, willing to listen to you and get your inputs on that, on how best to develop the sector. I think if you're approaching, I guess, such incentives and grants from that perspective, I think there's probably more room for discussion and more room to look at how and where does India or the different states come into play. I think the other consideration as well, Sunaina mentioned about the ministries actually looking at almost version 2.0 of these schemes, is I think the states have also stepped up. And in fact, each of the states have develop some of their state policies in this sector as well. So I think really for members of the audience, I'll say look at the 14 sectors and maybe look at maybe new sectors that are going to be announced as an indication from the government on where their priorities are going to be. And if you are working in those industries, what does that mean for you or for your clients actually? And I think that's where you need to start kind of augmenting your business strategy and start making plans if you need to come to India and understand what's happening here a bit more.
No, thanks a lot, Sabrina, for bringing that point. And I'll just reinforce one of the messages that Sabrina said is these 14 sectors are moved by the central government, but each of the 30 states also have a list of their sectors. While most of the sectors are similar, but say one of the largest states in the country has identified tourism as an industry. And within tourism, there is a lot of incentive which is available for players to come and set up facilities from a tourism perspective. Even film industry, for example, is a part of tourism itself for them. So if anyone is looking at putting up any studios or putting up any entertainment parks from a film perspective, all that will also attract further incentives from the state government. So state by state, this list could slightly differ, but centrally, the list of 13 or now 14 remains what it is. And we are likely to see an addition of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 more sectors which the government has been debating, discussing with various industry bodies like FYI, CII, and so on and so forth. So we may see some more additions in these sectors. So we will be happy to communicate that at the earliest in terms of the new sectors that the central government decides to add.
Thank you, Sunaina, Sabrina, and Singh. Maybe now I'll ask some questions regarding for Singapore companies to enter India. I think Sabrina, you'll be the right person to ask this question. So maybe Sabrina, one of the questions that we have is in Singapore perspective, comparing India with other Asian countries or even South Asia countries. So why should an investor choose India as their base for manufacturing? And I will combine 2 questions together for you, Sabrina, as well. So does Singapore company see difficulties in entering this market in India?
So I think on that question itself, I guess the why India question, I would really, oftentimes when companies actually ask us as well, I think we would usually also kind of throw it back to the companies. In part because I think every company is different in terms of their resources, in terms of their role in the ecosystem itself. I'd say for each company, oftentimes we would the first few questions we ask them is who are your clients and where are your clients currently, right? And I think if your clients are looking at India or if your clients are already in India and expanding in India, I think that's where you need to ask yourself the question, why are you not there? I think if you have to draw comparisons to other countries, I would do that comparison along the same lines as well. Why are your clients in certain countries and not in other countries? And I think very often times when we have Singapore companies who have actually come to us with very clear view on India, it is more often than not because either the clients have directed them and have made the decision for them that you must be in India or you're out, or I would say I think we do have Singapore companies that actually felt that they have missed the wave in China, and as a result of that, they are watching kind of which are the other big markets that are coming up, and therefore taking a more proactive stance towards that. I think for that second category of companies, they recognize that they will need to spend some time in India before they start reaping the benefits. And I think for some of our companies who have spent that time, guys like ClearPack, guys like Hubs Engineering, who have been here almost 5 to 7, 10 years back, are now reaping the benefits. And in fact, what's interesting for us was during COVID, was where actually several of these Singapore companies that already have presence in India, these are manufacturing presence in India, have chosen to expand their operations. In fact, I think ClearPack expanded twice and it's on the third expansion run this time, like currently. So there is merit to look at India, but I think you have to think very clearly who your clients are or who are going to be your future clients, and then you have to kind of take steps towards it. Yeah, so that's kind of my answer to it.
Thank you, Sabrina. Okay, maybe next question will direct more on the India side, like how do you attract or welcome foreign direct investment for manufacturing sector? So maybe Sunaina or Mr. Singh can take this question. One of these questions that we have was the initiative for Made in India aimed to promote domestic manufacturing, or was it conceptualized to attract big global manufacturers to set base in the country? So maybe Sunaina or Mr. Singh can answer this question.
Could you just repeat that question, please, Dexter? Whether it was?
Sorry, so was the initiative aims to promote domestic manufacturing, or was it to attract big global manufacturer to set base in the country? This initiative Made in India.
I think I would say the premise of Make in India was to attract global manufacturers to India, by showcasing all that India has to offer in terms of a conducive business environment, ready human capital, just the sheer numbers in India offering a large domestic market. And so I do think that the Make in India initiative has definitely been successful in drawing FDI into the country since inception. But I suppose you could also look at it from the point of view of promoting domestic manufacturing entrepreneurs. So I don't think it has to be either one in silos. I think it can be both complementing each other.
Thank you, Sunaina. Thank you. So maybe we move on to the next stage of our question. I think a lot of this manufacturing sector, they are talking about this term, I 4.0. Mr. Singh, I think you are very well versed in it. So we have a few questions regarding to I 4.0. First one, at the present, India lags behind in terms of I 4.0 adoption. So adopting I 4.0 for India manufacturing sector would definitely entice more FDI. So what are the industry I 4.0 initiative India manufacturing companies are more comfortable to adopt at the initial phase to help them entice more FDI? Maybe we can focus on certain parts of I 4.0 like automation, sensors and so on. So what are some of these initiatives or specific sectors in I 4.0 that Indian companies, manufacturing companies can adopt to during the initial phase to entice more FDI?
Yeah, thanks Dexter for bringing that out. And I do think that that India is a great place to drive Industry 4.0. The reason is because one, a lot of Industry 4.0 would mean a lot of technology. And this is not necessarily technology in terms of hardware, whether it is in terms of sensors or cameras or some such tools, but it's also technology in terms of platforms from a software perspective, which is required. Given that India already has a significant amount of at least the IT technology component within the country in terms of talent, getting these hardwares currently, which are imported largely, could position India very, very differently in the world. And that's where I think most of the Indian manufacturing companies are focusing on how to make their manufacturing processes, make their manufacturing plants more smarter. But as they do so, the entrepreneur in India always looks at what is the return on investment, Dexter. So the key point out here would be that if there are investments which are required to be done, they will be willing to do it, provided they get the return of investment of about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years time. This return on investment could be in any manner. It could be either in increase in productivity, it could be in terms of reducing power, it could be in terms of improvement in quality, it could be even in terms of improvement in throughput, which means can I sweat the existing assets better? But all those investments where the entrepreneur can find that he is able to get his return on investment in 2 to 3 years time, they will be willing to go ahead with it. So the good news is that all the players who are interested in bringing some of these technologies into the country, there is a huge market. Just that ensure that these models are having a lower ROI. At the same time, I would say look at affordable models. So I know a few companies, for example, who came in with their smart meters and their entire ecosystem for power consumption reduction. And the way they came into India is a pay-by-use model. They said that, okay, we will come to your plant. We will do the automatic tracking of power consumption by all the large power guzzlers in your facilities. You don't have to pay anything for the capital that we will put or the assets that we will put, but you pay me by the percentage reduction that you get. You give me a share of that, which the entrepreneurs were happy with because it was a pay-by-use model for them. So I would say that look at innovative models as you get into this space in India. And the manufacturing base is very large. Within that manufacturing base, let's not forget that a large number, when I say a large number, I mean about 2/3 of it is all the micro, small and medium segments. These people may not be able to afford all these technologies, and hence those affordable models are important for them. But the base is extremely large. So the demand could be extremely large for people who try to get in.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I think one of these questions by Raman is that touching on artificial intelligence projects in India, which is part of this I 4.0. What are the potential areas of AI projects in India? Maybe if you know anything, can share with Raman and also the attendees in the webinar.
Yeah, no, happy to share, Raman, maybe offline, but Raman, India actually has been providing a lot of this, not just for India, but even globally, especially in services. So when we talk about Facebook or when we talk about Netflix, and say all of us watch Netflix, and we see that if you watch a movie, then it says which are the next 5 movies that you're likely to see. And it also tracks so as to say that are you watching or are you not watching, so that the algorithm can undergo a change. Right now, they don't have an army of some 30,000 people sitting at the back end who are trying to do this. But of course, it is AI ML which is being put to use. But it is the Indian brains who are working with some of these large organizations who are building these algorithms, I would say. So a huge opportunity from an AI perspective. Similarly, whether it is to do with commodity forecasting, similarly it is to do with manufacturing. How do you simulate and how do you, in a casting plant, for example, how do you simulate and how do you see what is the heat which is required per ton of metal, which has to be converted into molten metal or something of that sort. So a lot of opportunities, I would say, from an AI perspective, and hence from an opportunity of a platform play, I would say, a huge opportunity from a platform play perspective. Maybe it is across all the sectors. So there is no separate scheme specifically for AI, if you see. But if you see all the 13 or the 14 sectors and the new ones that are likely to come about, all of them will have huge number of applications. Forget manufacturing, I would say even agriculture, huge amount of application when it comes to agri-tech and from an AI perspective. So it's a gold mine, Raman. If anyone is looking at investments in the space of AI into India, it's a gold mine. Let's keep in mind that there are 2 ways to increase output. One way is you put more money, you put more assets, and you produce more. And the other way is you improve productivity of the existing assets itself. So AI can play a significant role when it comes to improving productivity of the existing assets itself. So a huge upside on that side, Raman.
If I can just maybe chime in a little bit, perhaps not specific to AI, but just across the board in terms of I 4.0 and IoT adoption by the industries here. I think citing there's a NESCOM report, I think, that came out earlier this year or late last year, that actually mentioned that the I 4.0 investments in India have actually increased 10 times since 2011. So I think we have a common misunderstanding, that because India is very cost conscious, there's a large population, there's a large workforce, there's hesitancy in adopting of technologies. I think interacting with many of the manufacturers and corporates here is actually quite counterintuitive, but many of them are actually looking to adopt technologies precisely because India is huge. And I think precisely because there is urgency for them to catch up. I think the other aspect of why they're adopting these technologies very oftentimes is also from a compliance perspective. I mean, you were asking earlier about is manufacturing in India for domestic consumption or is it exports? I think depending on certain industries, there are industries here that are specifically looking at exports, and I think exports is kind of leading the growth of the industry itself. So I think these are the industries where we are seeing significant adoption of technologies. Our I4.0 players, Smart Factory Works, Cantiers, who have been working with the likes of your pharma sector, your chemical sector, your automotive, FMCG sector, they are actually seeing significant demand and adoption actually of solutions in India. Along the same lines, I think with the adoption of, when you're talking about sensors and actually understanding, having transparency of what happens in your manufacturing process, I think that's where AI comes in to really then make sense of that data itself. So I think that's I guess if we look again at each sector and also then the maturity of each sector, and that whether you're addressing a MSME demand or a large manufacturer demand, I think there are different stages where India is at in terms of needs for I4.0, but definitely I think the momentum is really back there.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Mr. Singh. I think, Mr. Singh, actually what you brought up about the time and pumping more money to generate more quantity of your output. Actually, one of these agro-tech companies that we met in Singapore mentioned the same thing as well. So I think this is the language that I4.0 is about, and it actually further proves that everything links and everything that you say actually is spoken across all this I4.0 industry. Okay, so maybe next one I'll move up to the EV question. We have particularly two questions I think can be linked together by Han Jing. So Han Jing wished to know that why in the past 5 years, many American and European car makers are pulling out from India. Currently only Suzuki, Hyundai, Kia can move on. And why is it so difficult for foreign car makers to enter and grow? And also, he or she would also like to know, how is the India policy for new EV car investment? I'm pretty sure it will be quite a positive reply for the EV part.
So maybe I can go in, and then Sunaina, feel free to chip in. So firstly, you're right. Factually, if you say that yes, a couple of car companies have exited India. So the two of them which exited India in the recent times were General Motors to begin with earlier, and then Ford about a year back. So these are the two car companies, but I would say that largely both of them had their own issues. I think if I look at both of them, and these are my views, I would say, they were there in India for almost about a decade, about 2 decades, 2 decades or more. They all came in probably in the late 90s, 96, 97, 98. But they struggled in terms of making money at the end of the day on their bottom line. And that is the reason why the two of them decided to move on, because how much amount of investment would a car company make into a country like India if they are not able to show up a positive bottom line? So somewhere I think that that they ran out of their runway in terms of turning around and making profitability. But at the same time, it is equally important to also note that while two players exited, we also had Kia, which came into the country at the same time. And Kia already has a 2-digit market share. So they have increased in terms of their market share significantly over the last 2 years itself. We had PSA, which came into the India, and or Stellantis, sorry, now I should call it as Stellantis, because it's a joint venture between 3 different players, and they are already picking good speed in the country. So while we have some players exiting, we also have some players coming in. So it's not that the story from a automobile perspective is not that strong or not that great or something of that sort. That That's the reason why people are continuing to look into India. While a few of them have come in, a lot more are still looking at getting into India. So these are some confidential news, and hence I can't put it here. But we have an equal number of people who are looking at getting into India. And of course, I forgot to mention, but MG Motors as well, 2016, 2017, just round about the same time when GM was exiting. In fact, they took over the GM's facility when they came into India. So they too came into India. So if I look at it, there is more people wanting to come rather than people wanting to go, and people who are wanting to go, there have to be learnings from it, because 2 decades into a country, but you're still not able to make money. What is the root cause? I'm sure that those organizations would have done their root cause analysis as to why were they not able to make money when others are able to actually make money in the country. So I'm not going into the diagnosis of it, but I'll leave it there. And coming to the second point on EV, I just wanted to let you know the largest outlay of the entire PLI scheme is on automotive. It's close to about 57,000 crore rupees that is there on automotive. And when you look at the definition of that PLI, whether it is for the OEM champion or the auto component champion, the components which are covered, the kind of vehicles which are covered are largely around EV, or I would say towards zero emission vehicles. So that is where the outlay is directed. So if anyone is interested in putting up any facility for either vehicle assembly, vehicle manufacturing, or auto components which are aligned to those zero emission or high-tech components, this is the right time. There is a huge outlay which is there. And options are both. You could come by yourself, or you could come through a JV route or through an alliance route as a technology partner route with any of the existing players. But it's a huge opportunity, I would say. Let me take a pause here. Sunaina, you would like to add, or?
Yes, Mr. Singh, I think Mr. Singh basically covered all aspects of your questions. But, in the first one, like he rightly said, I think there are systemic issues that companies individually face at an individual level, which potentially leads them to maybe exit markets. But that's not to say that India is not a conducive market for auto and autocoms in general. For instance, in addition to the ASEAN market, at Invest India, I also look at Germany and Eastern Europe. And my German companies, in fact, are expanding in India, like Daimler, Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz. They're doing great. There's this Chakan district in Maharashtra, which is the hub for auto and automobile manufacturing. So again, it's just, I think, a systemic issue with companies at a company level that causes them to move out. In addition to maybe some of the EV-related policies and questions apart from, just the PLI scheme on auto and autocoms, there's also a faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles, which is the FAME scheme, which has a budget of over $1 billion US. In addition to that, there's also the EV battery swapping policy that was just recently announced in the budget this year. So there are a lot of things that the government is currently doing to up their game in the entire EV ecosystem. Apart from just regular manufacturing, there's also a lot of focus on EV startups. So there are actually 160 plus electric vehicle startups that are currently registered with DPIIT, which is the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. There's a lot of VC funding that's coming into this space. So it's definitely, I think, an area that India is focusing on at the moment, or is a priority sector, I would say.
No, thanks, Sunaina, for covering that. I think a lot of additional benefits beyond PLI as well for EV. So hopefully it's a good space to get in.
Thank you, Mr. Singh and Sunaina. So one more question regarding the talent availability in India manufacturing sector. So Stuart actually asked this question. Can you update us the talent availability in India for manufacturing sector? Does India face the same talent shortage and challenges as other countries, programmers and automation engineers, for example?
So maybe I'll take a attempt at answering that question, Stuart. So when it comes to technology skills, okay, and technology skills are required not just in IT companies but also in manufacturing at the same time. India also faces the same situation as we face globally. So we do see a huge talent shortage when it comes to the requirement of programmers or people with automation knowledge and so on and so forth. I think the only advantage that I can claim that we have as a country is that we have the ability of churning out a large number of engineers on a per year basis. So while there is a crunch in terms of some of these skills which are under high demand globally, high demand, I would say, because of the digitization wave and COVID as a catalyst on the digitization wave. So a sudden demand, I would say, for some of those skills. But maybe as a country, we will be able to overcome that shortage faster. And we could become, once again, a net exporter of some of these skills. Now, that is the reason why, Stuart, we find so many global in-house centers or GCCs, as we call them, as global capability centers of large manufacturing companies getting set up in India, because they do realize that some of these shortages that they face, whether it is in US, Europe, or Asian countries, India is able to fulfill those talent requirements in a shorter span of time. On the other hand, some of the skills which are traditionally required in manufacturing, which could be to do with more skills of people who are capable of doing machining or melting and so on and so forth, that particular set of skill we have not really seen any great change before or after COVID, I would say. So we are seeing a significant difference even in terms of shortage and salary hikes. Salary hikes largely are more to those folks who are more in the digital or the tech space, but people who are there in the traditional manufacturing space, there is not much of salary hike. It is traditionally what it was expected to be around the same lines. So when I talk to my colleagues who are there in manufacturing and I speak to them about the great resignation wave, some of them say that, oh, I have not been touched by it, because they are traditionally using the traditional skill basket. So they are in some sense protected by this great resignation wave. But there are equally players who are more into high tech or more into tech space who are seeing the same resignation wave hitting them as well. So it's a mix of two. But given that we have a large ability to generate talent on a yearly basis, we may be able to fulfill this requirement, and not just for India, but even export this talent globally.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Okay, so maybe last question before we end the session. I think it's the most interesting question. I will direct to Sunaina. So PM Modi actually aims to make India's semiconductor manufacturing sector a global market leader on par with Taiwan and Korea. So what do you think can be implemented to see this plan take shape?
Thanks, Dexter. So I think there are basically two aspects that put India on the map for semiconductor manufacturing. The first, of course, is for any country to be competitive. So I think that in that respect, India has it covered, like what Mr. Singh already mentioned during his presentation regarding the semicon industry. There's the Semicon India product program, which offers fiscal incentives of around 10 billion US dollars at the central level. And then this is further complemented, as he mentioned, by various state incentives. And Gujarat, in fact, I think has recently launched a semiconductor policy, and they're soon also going to be setting up a semicon city. They already have a gift city, which is a banking sort of fintech city. And in addition to that, now they're going to do a semicon city. So overall, when you look at it, if you pretty much put together the central and the state incentives, India is giving you incentives worth 70 to 75% of your entire capex requirement. In addition to this, I think India will also start focusing on maybe land, water, and power subsidies, because to the best of my knowledge, the semicon industry is is a high consumer of water. So if the government is able to provide incentives in these three things, then there is no reason why companies would not be attracted to set up manufacturing of semicon products in India. And I think the other aspect would be cooperation. So instead of just simply competing with countries like Taiwan and Korea, I would expect India to possibly engage in knowledge sharing with these countries and companies from these countries to allow for ecosystem replication of sorts. So we all know that Taiwan is the market leader in foundry, that's where the chips are manufactured, and Korea is a market leader in the memory segment. We have companies like Samsung and SK Hynix sitting out of Korea. So it would be, I think, great to have MOUs between these countries and some of our Indian counterparts, bring them here, maybe with universities like IIT stepping in, just to focus on knowledge sharing and building that ecosystem in India from scratch. And I think we need to just focus on better linkages with the global supply chain rather than trying to do it independently in silos. I think that's my take on this.
Thank you, Sunaina. Thank you, Mr. Singh, Ms. Ho, and Ms. Kana. I think it was a long Q&A session. It was quite insightful sharing, and hope it actually inspired attendees, on potential new ventures into the manufacturing sector in India. So we have come to the end of today's session.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
for-
Dexter. Thank
thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Dexter, in case, any companies do have any further queries on investing in India, any questions, you have my email. This is what Invest India is here for. So please direct all questions at me. Would be very happy to assist and facilitate.
No problem, Sunaina. No problem. Thank you, Mr. Singh and Sabrina as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks,
Sabrina.
everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. This was a lovely panel discussion.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We have come to the end of today's session. We hope that this webinar has provided good information, inspire organizations to a varying extent on potential internationalization into India. There will be several upcoming FYI webinars as shown on the screen. If you are interested, please scan on the QR code provided on the slide to register or contact us for more information. On behalf of Singapore Business Federation, we'd like to thank everyone for making this event a success. Special thanks to our supporting organization, Enterprise Singapore, Federation of India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Invest India, and Deloitte. My name is Dexter O, Market Advisor at SBM Global Group. And thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the day and hope to hear from you soon.